Even in 1979, Bob Dylan could cause a commotion. That was the year he released Slow Train Coming, the album that announced his embrace of Christianity, soon to be followed by Saved in 1980 and Shot of Love in 1981, his Born Again trilogy. For those 3 years, the iconoclast, freethinker and reluctant voice of a generation proclaimed faith in salvation by Jesus Christ, despite his Jewish upbringing, with lyrics that drew a line in the sand. In Precious Angel on Slow Train Coming, he declared, "You either got faith or you got unbelief, and there ain't no neutral ground." That phase of Mr. Dylan's music gets a revelatory second look with the boxed set Trouble No More, the Bootleg Series Vol. 13 1979 to 1981, to be released Friday. 8 CDs and a DVD collect performances, rehearsals and studio outtakes. The DVD intersperses live footage from 1980. Mr. Dylan, often camera-shy, clearly wanted this era documented, with fiery sermons written by Luc Sante and delivered by the actor Michael Shannon. Photo. From 1979 to 1981, Bob Dylan released 3 albums within 3 years: Slow Train Coming, Saved and Shot of Love. Credit Howard Hawk. From concerts and recording sessions, the boxed set includes 14 previously unreleased songs to add to the Dylan catalog, notably the remarkable Making a Liar Out of Me, a song that first surfaced on the anthology Biograph in 1985. Caribbean Wind turns up in a radically different version, gentler, with alternate lyrics, captured at a 1980 rehearsal. Some fans who had stayed with Mr. Dylan through his multiple transitions since the early 1960s, from folk singer to electric rocker to country crooner to Americana sage, rejected his new, sectarian message. The critic Grail Marcus's first reaction to Shot of Love was that it was arrogant, intolerant and smug. Doubling down on his message, Mr. Dylan also decided to sing only his new evangelical songs on tour, interspersed with some preaching, though he relented in 1981 and began performing older songs too. Throughout the Born Again years, his audiences would be divided in a way they hadn't been since Mr. Dylan went electric in the mid-1960s. There were protests outside shows and a mix of enthusiasts and hecklers in the theaters. Photo. Trouble No More is the latest installment in Mr. Dylan's Bootleg Series. Fred Tackett, the lead guitarist in Mr. Dylan's touring and recording band from 1979 to 81, and now a member of Little Feat, recalled in a telephone interview last week seeing a man in the front row holding a sign that read, "Jesus loves your old songs." The contentious crowds gave Mr. Dylan a little impetus to go on, Mr. Tackett said. "I don't know if he liked it or not, but it inspired him to keep on keeping on." Continue reading the main story. Related coverage. Bob Dylan's Secret Archive, March 2, 2016. Quite a garage sale. 11 highlights from the Bob Dylan Archive, March 4, 2016. Dylan's 1966 tapes find a direction home. Nov. 10, 2016. Bob Dylan wins Nobel Prize, Redefining Boundaries of Literature. Oct. 13, 2016. Recent comments. Michael Bade 13 minutes ago. I remember his Slow Train tour at the Paramount in Seattle. He was the most engaged and musically aware that I've seen him. He looked at the Tortuga 16 minutes ago. Dylan kinda lost me during the Christian years. It wasn't his conversion to Christianity, it was, as the critic Grail Marcus pointed out, Chris 17 minutes ago. Does Dylan's evangelical phase deserve another look? No. God no. See all comments. Write a comment. Advertisement. Continue reading the main story. Beyond the initial shock of Mr. Dylan's conversion, many of his Christian songs remain close to the rest of his work. Biblical allusions and echoes of gospel structure were part of his songwriting from the beginning, as in Blowin' in the Wind. So were a sense of moral gravity, a righteous tone, apocalyptic thoughts, and a delight in the rich and powerful receiving their just comeuppance. Although Mr. Dylan released the 3 albums within 3 years, he was evolving fast. Slow Train Coming is full of wrathful warnings like "gotta serve somebody" and "when you gonna wake up." saved moves to direct proselytizing, positive promises and more conventional gospel music. And in 1981, with Shot of Love, Mr. Dylan was already looking beyond doctrine, juxtaposing the sacred and secular in rowdy blues rock like the groom still waiting at the altar, while praising God in his own way in every grain of sand. Photo. Throughout Bob Dylan's born-again years, his audiences would be divided in a way they hadn't been since he went electric in the mid-1960s. Credit Baron Wolman. Decades later, what comes through these recordings above all is Mr. Dylan's unmistakable fervor, his sense of mission. The studio albums are subdued, even tentative, compared with what the songs became on the road. Mr. Dylan's voice is clear, cutting and ever improvisational. Working the crowds, he was emphatic, committed, sometimes teasingly combative. And the band tears into the music. The tour recordings provide multiple versions of many songs, yet they're anything but routine, shifting tempo and attack, while Mr. Dylan flings every line with conviction. There were moments of reverence too, like the quiet coda in the prayer like, "What can I do for you?" Just Mr. Dylan on harmonica and the notable soul songwriter Spooner Oldham on organ, sharing experiments in extended harmony. He's always been about change, Jim Keltner, the band's drummer, said last week. What Bob wanted was for people to interact with the music and among themselves. He wanted to hear people playing stuff that he'd never heard before. He wanted people to rise, and we did. I believe that we did. With his encyclopedic knowledge of American music, Mr. Dylan cannily chose the backup for his Christian songs, a deep-rooted Southern soul band. He recorded Slow Train Coming and Saved in Muscle Shoals, Alabama, with Jerry Wexler and the keyboardist Barry Beckett as producers. They had worked there on Aretha Franklin's pivotal 1967 soul hits. Sign up for the Louder newsletter. Every week, stay on top of the latest in pop and jazz with reviews, interviews, podcasts and more from the New York Times music critics. Sign up. Privacy policy: opt out or contact us anytime. While the studio band for Slow Train Coming featured Mark Knopfler and Pick Withers of Dire Straits, Mr. Dylan's touring band was American and mostly Southern, steeped in gospel, the blues, rock and reggae. Along with Mr. Tackett and Mr. Keltner, it had Mr. Oldham, the bassist Tim Drummond, the pianist Terry Young and a changing lineup of 4 or 5 tambourine-shaking female gospel singers. Mr. Dylan originally planned a horn section as well. The set unveils some rehearsal tracks, but the women's voices were more vivid and jubilant on their own. They were prolific years. Mr. Dylan discarded more than a dozen songs that show up on Trouble No More, among them the Chuck Berry flavor Jesus Is the One, and the euphoric affirmation I Will Love Him. In Ain't Gonna Go to Hell for Anybody, Mr. Dylan warns of his own guile. I can mislead people as well as anybody. I've got the vision to cause any kind of division, but insists he has reformed. And in making a liar out of me, over a stolid, inexorable 2-chord vamp, Mr. Dylan argues for compassion and conscience. The hopes and fears and dreams of the discontented, they threaten now to overtake your promised land. Mr. Keltner said last week that he cherishes an onstage photograph from the tour by the filmmaker Howard Hawks, shot from behind his shoulder. I'm hunched over the drums, and Bob is standing there with his guitar, he said. His hair was this perfectly beautiful afro, or jufro maybe. And the way the light is playing on his hair, it looked like he had a combination of a halo and a crown of thorns. For all the world, it looks like Jesus standing there.